Afade and welcome to Data Points. My name is Ryan. I'm the president of Pinpoint Guam. And today we're going to be speaking with Randy Salas, and he's the president of Proferre Inc., one of the primes that works with the federal government in support of the buildup that's been coming down the pipe. Now, one of the things that we're interested in talking to Randy about is, procurement, some of the obstacles that he faces being a developer here, and also bringing projects outside the fence. And we think that's important because how are we going to develop capacity and housing if we can't get the labor that we need to work on local projects? If you like what we're doing, please give us a like, share, subscribe, save. Listen to us on any of your favorite platforms, Instagram or on Facebook. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. You'll be glad you did. Afade, my name is Ryan, and I'm the president of Pinpoint, and we're here today with Randy Salas, the president of Proferre LLC? Inc. And Proferre Inc. is a prime. And Randy, can you tell us what a prime vendor is?
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Yeah, so prime contractor typically just means that we have a direct contract with either any client, whether that's NAFAC, whether that's local Gov Guam, or the owner of a given project. But basically, because we are in direct contact with them, really all the onus is on us, regardless of how many subs we have underneath us.
Sure. So in I guess extracting that, you're the general and everyone else will be a sub under you.
Exactly.
As a prime. But in the correlation of that, specifically in my context, is your contractual relationship with the federal government.
Yes.
Right? So you have to be a prime to do business with the federal government directly, correct?
Pretty much. I can't imagine any scenario in which you would have a contractual relationship with the government in which you wouldn't be a prime.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. And then everything else subs under you.
Yes.
So what are the types of things that you have to do to have that direct contractual relationship?
So it depends on the contract vehicle. Obviously, there's multiple types. The ones that we always typically think of are the sort of the sole acquisition types of contracts where, there's multiple vendors or multiple contractors all bidding for the same project. And so eventually the government chooses one of those based off of any number of factors. Within that, there are actually two primary methods by which the contracting will actually determine who the winner is. There's lowest price technically acceptable, or LPTA, and then there's best value. So in both of those, they actually have very different sort of methodologies. LPTA kind of takes your experience and past performance and does a yes or no. Basically, are you acceptable or not? And if you're acceptable, then great. You kind of go into this sort of short list of contractors that they deem acceptable to take on this project. Then upon that, they look at your award, your sort of estimated project amount, and determine from there, whatever the lowest price out of all those acceptable people, that is the ultimate winner.
I see.
Best value is actually quite different, where they take sort of a combination of multiple factors. They take a combination of your past performance and corporate experience, take some of your technical writing and how you wrote your proposal, how you said you were going to do it, what your means and methods are in that proposal, and then take price into account. And sort of they do this more subjective look at it, and it's a little bit harder, but oftentimes allows for the greater variance between different contractors. So to determine that maybe it's not the cheapest one that they want to go with, and they want to go with a more expensive one because they know they're going to get more value out of it, hence the best value.
Sure. And there's a technical apparatus which effectively which determines your success and failure. And can you tell me about what do you specialize in Proferre? Is there a special type of project that you do or a special type of segment that you attack?
Yes, absolutely. So Proferre is typically within what we call services. So the last contract that we won is for grounds maintenance. So we do the grass maintenance, tree maintenance, tree removal, that sort of thing for Anderson and Navy. We tend to do a lot of those types of projects. They tend to, obviously there isn't a strict deliverable that gets put out at the end of the day. There's no building that gets built or anything like that. It really is around a sort of at least 5-year project with services to be rendered within those 5 years. We focus a lot on that because, we understand that as the military builds up, that is going to be an even bigger opportunity later on. All this buildup is going to require maintenance, going to require additional services going forward. And so that's an area that my company can start growing in and start taking more expertise in.
Right. So you have a baseline, by your contract, and then you can expand it to different verticals. And now you have the infrastructure. So where are you finding the most significant issues in that environment for you doing business locally?
Man, it's a lot all over the place, to be honest. It's hard to pinpoint one. But it could be anything, right? I think Guam is well known right now for having a resource constraint across the board, whether that is manpower, whether that's the technical component of the manpower, whether it is materials, especially long lead items take forever to get to Guam. Obviously, logistics are also extremely difficult. But one area that we're seeing a lot of difficulty in is primarily around the manpower side. So we do utilize a lot of immigrant labor now. We are bringing in a lot of H-2s. But obviously that initial first run process of getting H-2s in is quite difficult. And there is the additional component of housing. And getting enough housing for all the H-2s that are coming in and be able to project that out is also one of the biggest issues that we're facing.
Which is ironic because we're bringing people in to build housing, but it compounds the problem because we need to house them while they're
Exactly. Exactly.
So are the expectations realistic, to achieve this by the time we need them?
It's tough. I would honestly say before the expectations were a little bit unrealistic, primarily because we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. As you said, we need these people to build housing to be able to house these people that are coming in temporarily as well. So it became a little bit difficult because there was a period of time in which we weren't allowed to use H-2s outside of the direct federal contracts. So even if there was a contract that was going to support one of those projects, we weren't allowed to bring them in and use those H-2s there.
Yes.
Luckily, the requirements have loosened up a little bit. So now we have a little bit more leeway in terms of where we can put H-2s and use them on projects. So now some of our projects outside the fence as well has been accelerated. But the main issue, again, comes with the fact is that, if you're making this much money and you have this much profit on a inside the base project, pushing people outside the base not only comes with a resource constraint, but also comes with the opportunity cost problem as well.
Yes. And so that's interesting to me because one of the things that is talked about is construction capacity. We, conservative estimates say there's at least another $2 billion in capacity here. But are you properly incentivized to fill that capacity, especially when we're looking at projects outside the fence versus, hey man, I'm going to commit my resources to this bid and I'm going to just ride on this because I'm going to make 2x on this versus 1.15 outside the fence.
Exactly. So that's why costs even outside the fence are rising dramatically as well. It's not necessarily just because wages are higher, which they obviously are. It's not just because material cost is higher, which it obviously is, but it also is because all those resources are being utilized right now on base.
Yes.
So no matter what, the projects on one side will affect projects on the other side as well.
And then I guess there's that interplay between your labor force and what projects they can touch outside the fence. So what are those things that they can touch outside the fence?
So now it's basically any project that has a direct link to support a given project on federal base as well.
Okay.
So if there are barracks and things like that, we have been allowed to help out on some of those. But again, it has to be temporary in nature, and it isn't as clear-cut as projects on base. We do have to really argue it and show why it has a direct benefit to a federal project.
Is attainable or affordable housing properly incentivized in correlation to the labor pool?
So I believe for barracks and things like that, it can be. But for anything that isn't being used for either house military members or house people supporting those military projects, cannot be used.
Interesting. So if I wanted to build the hospital or like 800 units for a middle income housing that's within federal guidelines, that wouldn't qualify as a supporting issue?
So those ones would,
okay,
because those ones have some federal funding associated with them, despite being a local GovGuam project. So our GovGuam projects are actually kind of split. We do have the ones that have federal funding involved, and those ones absolutely we are allowed to put in H-2s. But the local GovGuam projects that have no association with the federal funding, we can't use them on.
So that seems like a major obstacle to delivering housing to the market, not being able to have people come in and develop projects that are not tied to local housing.
Yes, exactly.
And then on top of that, there's an opportunity cost associated because, okay, I do have a local labor force that's cultivated, but man, I'm going to focus these guys on this where I'm going to yield a higher rate of return.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't know that. And that's significant. I thought if it was it's correlated with any kind of housing being reproduced, you could pull your...
No, not all of them.
And most people are running with like 100 guys a shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to be able to scale. Like, may I ask how many guys you have?
We're about 150 right now.
Right. So
yeah,
you have significant capacity. And if you wanted to, if you were properly incentivized, you would take out. And in fact, you are taking on projects outside the fence, right?
Mm-hmm. We are.
So tell me more about the types of projects that you're looking at outside the fence that really work with what you're doing.
So again, we do tend to focus on the service-based projects. So we do a lot of service stuff for the airport, for example. We handle their maintenance. We're working with a nonprofit, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So we do multiple things for them, whether it's environmental monitoring, fire break maintenance and management. We handle inspections and environmental testing for other companies as well. So we tend to stay primarily within services and just being able to provide sort of what we eventually want to do is provide a more turnkey solution to a lot of these things. We don't intend to go directly into construction, the vertical construction that we all think about and everything like that, but rather more of these support services that ensure that vertical construction, whoever's doing it, is supported in the right way.
I see. I get it. So one of the things, we just talked about in terms of allocating labor and some of the structural issues. So what can the local government do? You and I have been in construction roundtables, and, there's all kinds of issues that you face. But one of the issues that I see is like, well, how can you expand your capacity outside the fence because of the limitations? What are some of the things we can do locally that will help get your capacity outside and really help people outside the fence?
Yeah, I think just with any construction project, timelines are always the biggest thing, right? So whether that's a timeline on permitting, which we also run into a lot of problems on projects. And so one of the things that we're always looking to is what are the ways that we can shorten that time frame? And obviously we're talking about permitting. We do have those conversations as well. I'm on the board of directors for Guam Contractors Association, and we have had conversations with legislature in terms of how to shorten the time frame on permitting. But one other area that we also want to start talking about and hopefully getting more traction on is shortening the time frame and shortening the requirements with regards to approving barracks.
Okay.
Because right now, it is very hard and it's very limiting to be able to build a barracks. Not only obviously it's a zoning problem, a true problem, and obviously rezoning takes forever, but even on those lands where we do have the right zoning, getting the approvals across to be able to build the barracks in the first place, even disregarding the construction costs and the opportunity costs, it still takes a very, very long time.
Right.
And just as we've all seen, construction moves fast. And we need people now. In fact, we probably needed people yesterday. So with that, it again becomes this very, very difficult push and pull. How many resources do we dedicate towards getting a resource that may not even be around for another 2 or 3 years when there are so many things that we need to do within this next 2 to 3 year period? So really anything the local government can do to either decrease requirements, shorten timeframes, or provide any sort of tax credit or tax sort of benefit to all the contractors that are trying to do the right thing. Because again, we can change these barracks into potentially some new product for our future as well. It doesn't have to stay as a temporary workforce.
Sure. Yeah. And then, that's interesting because eventually, yes, the transient workers are going to leave, and this housing will have to be repurposed at some point. Exactly. And I think a lot of the barracks developers are thinking with that in mind as well, just the entrance and the exit.
Yep, absolutely.
So what about like the way RFPs and procurement, like how does that affect the way you do business?
So that definitely has a very large impact on us. Obviously, RFPs and sort of the way we have to go about bidding on things has a huge impact on how we do business. Especially when it comes to the whole LPTA versus best value that I was talking about earlier, that can have a very large impact on the way that we do things because we know sometimes it's effectively a race to the bottom for certain projects. So when we do bids, we kind of have a general sense that, hey, we're pretty likely to win this one, or we're pretty unlikely to win this one, or we really, really need this type of project. So we're going to go at this one pretty low to make sure that we try to win it, that sort of thing. And we know that it tends to have a trickle effect into the other contractors as well, because we all see the winning price on any given bid. So it affects us even further going forward when we look at this other bid and say, well, hey, our competitor won the previous one and they had to take a dive here, or we at least think they had to take a dive based off of our own projections and our own estimates. But again, the way that the RFP is made, the vagaries and sometimes uncertainties that arise with the RFP makes us really, really consider how much of a risk should we take, how much of a risk can we absorb and swallow.
And so that's interesting to me because we talk a lot about additive, and there's a lot of incentives in the NDAA about incentivizing additive manufacturing, and it seems like the military would be a buyer for additive if you had a degree of expertise or a willingness to do a design build. And I actually even recently heard that the military bought a steel housing development, and they're going to be doing that behind the fence,
Yep.
right? And so that's interesting to me because the provider of that is now going to gain experience in a alternate material, and it'll get wider acceptance in the market as a whole. But that seems like a nice opportunity to try those kinds of additive things, especially as a prime to develop your local capacity and then spill it out outside the fence to the benefit of the local market. What are you seeing there?
So actually, it's really interesting. Excuse me. In the last SAMI conference, we actually did have a very good discussion around what we also call ECI, or early contractor involvement. So as you discussed, there's design build, there's also design bid build. In either case, what they've started to see a lot of success with in other regions is the earlier that you get the actual builder or the contractor involved to either examine the design, to provide some thoughts or some notes on the design, typically the better the project goes.
Yes.
The cheaper it is, the smoother it is, the less we have these sort of vague and uncertain moments. And so I know some of the larger contractors out in the States are pushing for greater ECI here on Guam. And obviously we as contractors are also hoping for the same. When we've seen on our side, any time that there's been a design build project, obviously there's a whole bunch of other requirements. It does become more difficult.
Yes.
It takes more time. But when it comes to actually digging, when it comes to actual boots on the ground, it tends to be faster. It tends to be much smoother. And I think the government has started to change some of their thought processes on starting to absorb that more. I know it's obviously difficult to change things within the government and change things at a quick pace, but I think I've been seeing some twinklings that they're actually going to be doing it.
But that's where the innovation comes, right? It comes from the design, bid, build, the conceptualization, and that's where you incorporate those new materials like fiberglass rebar, and you do metal decking, and you do different things that you haven't done before, but it's a leverage of efficiencies. But you have control of the project from inception all the way to delivery, and you know that you have that capacity internally versus the government, someone in the government figuring out, oh, well, let's try these 5 things, but maybe they don't work in your thing. So you shift back to tried and true. We're just going to do it this way.
Exactly. Well, it's also part of the overall process when it comes to a federal contract. One of the biggest things that any federal contractor has to do is provide submittals to the government.
Okay.
And get them reviewed, get them accepted, all of that stuff. That submittal process can take a very, very long time, depending on the type of project that you have. And what we've been seeing is that the time frames for those are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So again, that kind of means if you're a contractor, do you really have the time to be able to start thinking about innovative ways, let alone even present that to the government and then try to get that approved by the government and go through that back and forth? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes the government's just going to say, hey, you got to go, these were the specs, this is what you bid on, go with that.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Well, I guess if that's the way you're going to go.
Yeah.
But tell me about how the tariff environment and the economic stuff has, turmoil, I should say, has affected your bids and the way you do business and how you forecast.
So luckily, it hasn't had too much of a direct impact just yet. We haven't necessarily seen dramatically increased prices or anything like that. But obviously, everyone's waiting with bated breath as to the overall impact. And so one of the main issues is that it's getting a lot harder for us to be able to talk to suppliers and vendors and get sort of a clean commitment for a set period of time for that price period. So again, that also throws our bids off because more often than not, the time difference between us submitting a bid and the award of that bid can be anywhere up to 6 months to even a year. And if we can't hold our suppliers' pricing for that period of time, then we have to account for some increase there.
Yes.
But again, that's a very, very subjective methodology for how you calculate that. And how do you calculate that versus how do your competitors calculate that? And again, you're really baking in risk, and how much of that risk are you willing to absorb?
Right. But then in projects outside the fence, you do the same kind of math, especially those long tail projects where you have to speculatively buy land and then bring housing to the market. And it's almost impossible to predict. And that's why these houses get so expensive, because I have to build that into my model to anticipate I don't know what's going to happen in 3 months, let alone 18, let alone the 3 years it's going to take me. Plus, I have the prospect of selling all the stuff once I build it, right? And how am I going to do that? So that should educate the consumer on why houses are so expensive here and why we have to look at things like different materials. And we have to overcome this stigma that comes with, because really we have no place else to go.
We really don't. Resources are limited across the board on Guam, and getting resources in is extremely expensive. I think probably more expensive than any other American territory at all, even compared to Hawaii, Alaska, probably to a certain extent as well. We just have to go through that many more hoops here on Guam than we do anywhere else, and to account for that is difficult.
Sure, and I guess like in the terms of generational wealth building, man, if it's on the property and you own it and it's a safe space to live, whether it's concrete or a container or like a lean-to, if it works, eventually you can improve it. You enjoy the advantages of it. You can appreciate it. But we have to provide the apparatus to allow for financing, allow for insurance. Those types of things need to happen. And I think that's where the government has to come in and help as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If the government can help to either promote or incentivize money to stay on Guam too, I think that'd be extremely helpful, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if we're talking about contracting as a whole, one of the things that we always look to, being local and being a company that was really born and raised here on Guam, we're always looking to develop capacity on Guam and develop competency on Guam. My first priority will always be to hire somebody from Guam to develop local talent before going to states, before getting in H-2s and everything like that. Those are my last resorts. And I know that's not always the case, and that's okay. I understand where everyone else is coming from, because it just makes sense. It makes financial sense for them to look towards H-2s, to look towards talent from the states, because it is difficult to find on Guam. So whatever the government can do to either incentivize people on Guam to stay on Guam and not sort of have the brain drain problem, or contractors to develop talent within locally on Guam, I think both of those would have a cascading effect to increase our competency and capability, which will allow us to hopefully be better companies, be better contractors, which will allow us to hopefully get better space to be able to start doing more projects outside the fence at somewhat lower rates than what we do inside the fence, and eventually keep building resources slowly but surely to eventually get us to a spot where we can start getting a little bit more affordable housing and attainable housing.
So in terms of your workforce, what do you aspire to, right? So you have skilled laborers, right? But again, that labor is always going to be transient, because we're not going to necessarily have the construction base here, right? Yep. So you're going to, the workforce that you're going to keep and you're going to retain is going to be effectively management and safety. Like, what kind of skill capacity do you think people should have if they want to be with you for the long haul?
Honestly, it doesn't always have to be management and safety or QCs or anything like that. Obviously, those are the easy ones, the easy ones for you to develop into. But even the strongly technical people we want to keep on island. So as I mentioned, we do a lot of environmental work ourselves. So, we're open to hiring a lot of biologists, hiring a lot of people that have any sort of interest in sustainability and conservationism. Mm-hmm. Primarily, again, to be able to get them to do the work that we need to do now, but eventually to start expanding lines of business, because it starts here, but it eventually gets much bigger. And so to keep getting them in, even if they don't want to be in management, even if they don't want to lead a group of people, but they want to be that expert in that field that they love, then great, we'll find a place for them.
Well, I guess more so I was leading you the wrong way. I guess like where I'm chasing is there's a technical subset that isn't like out in the construction like site, brick and mortar, lifting stuff and putting it down. There's robotics, there's CAD, there's design, there's all kinds of stuff. Like we're doing amazing stuff in 3D or we're doing 3D versions of plans and visualizing their drones and the technical capacity. And I would think that stuff has to stay here. And that's stuff where if you were an entrepreneur, I'd want to work with you, learn, and then become your partner and provide that service to you, much in the way Proferre is probably working with other vendors to develop that specialized service, because construction is getting way more technical. And it's not like, really in construction, they're biochemists and molecular scientists when you're talking about additive, right? So it hasn't changed in since 1970 in terms of process, but now you're seeing the scale, especially with AI and site monitoring and all that stuff, right?
So actually on that note, we actually do hire a significant number of sort of off the wall majors that you wouldn't think is being part of construction. So we've hired a math major, for example, to help us out with data management.
Right.
I've hired software engineers to help us automate services within the company and everything like that. I've hired English majors to help me with work plans and bid writing and everything like that. I've hired a comms specialist to help out and smooth out internal communications. Pretty much any major that's out there, any sort of technical expertise that's out there, it's pretty surprising, but you can have a very significant impact on construction and be able to improve processes and improve things across the board.
No, I agree. And so that's the exciting thing about what you do. It's just the idea to spin off all those services, the internal needs that you have. And there is a lot of exciting careers, and they're throwing a lot of money.
Absolutely.
I mean, like you aren't even necessarily the biggest prime, right? There are
absolutely
hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's all there, right? And that's the industry that's growing. That's where you build your base, and that's where you develop that capacity.
Exactly. Absolutely.
So talking about those different subsets, talk to me about the data that you get from the government, how you can leverage that, and how having more subsets of data available to you can help you run your business better.
Absolutely. Data is massive. Data is really everything that makes us better and makes us improve things. So one of the major things that we've always been looking to get from the government to be able to assist us in this very easy low-hanging fruit is really safety information. Right? We don't necessarily need to know the specifics. You don't need to know names. You don't need to know the contractor. But knowing the incidents that have occurred, the types of incidents that they were, and the corrective actions that came afterwards, we've actually been looking to hopefully take AI and be able to take all of that information, generate models based off of it, and show us, okay, well, where are the big risk areas? What are the ones that are either get into a near miss more often than not? And what does that mean? Because it's completely different for a safety incident to have not occurred and we were able to catch it before it happened to compare to safety incidents that did occur. And so getting that understanding and that analysis between these are the types of near miss incidents and these are the actual incidents leverages us to be able to learn a lot more, develop our teams, and really focus in on what we can see as the biggest risk areas. And that's just one component.
Yeah.
It can be a litany of other things that data can help us understand and help us improve.
But you use data in a lot of different ways where, like any federal bid now, they incorporate a GIS mapping component. So you have to map every component that you're doing. Do you see that on the local side as well?
Yes. So as part of the environmental side, we actually use GIS every day, basically. Not only do we have to tag resources in terms of the threatened and endangered species, whether it's orchids or cycads or any sort of ungulate, we also still need to use GIS for property lines, property boundaries, to show the government what we've looked at and what's been available to us, to note if there's any munitions or any sort of cultural artifacts that are there as well. The GIS data is extremely important and has been helpful for us as well. And obviously it has been somewhat difficult sometimes. We don't always get the GIS that we need, but getting more and more of the GIS data and being able to use that together with our current GIS data has been extremely helpful.
And ironically, your GIS component is probably more significant than the government's, I would say.
I don't know about that. I'd say probably within our given project, sure.
Yeah, but that's what I say. You have detailed mapping of the stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, just because I know there's not a lot of good mapping, right? They're working on it, but again, it's a funding limitation.
Yeah, and they have a lot more data to get through than we do.
Right, so. But the irony is there's a lot more accurate mapping privately held than there is publicly held. But I think the attention is being paid to the point where now that's being prioritized.
Yes.
But so as an example, so like for bidding, right? When you're trying to site out materials and anticipate, do you look at like the bid like 5 years down the road and anticipate, okay, I'm going to bid on these 5 projects. If I win them, I'm going to need this. Do you apply that kind of foresight when you're looking at your material pipelines and things like that?
Sometimes.
Okay.
So we tend to look at it more in terms of what is our limiting resource. So oftentimes, being a local contractor and being relatively small, honestly, key personnel is probably one of our most difficult components that we need to match. So making sure that we pursue the right projects, but we also don't overstretch ourselves where we aren't able to get the right key personnel in the right places for these projects. That's really what we look more towards. That sort of longer projection, we do look at that at times if there's a significantly large project that we know we want to pursue. So, for example, I opened up Proferre in 2021 with the specific intent of winning this federal contract that we had just won. So in 2021, I was projecting out towards 2024. What do I need to have in place by this time? So who are the key personnel I need to have? What are those things that I need to have in place? What are the materials I need to have? The vendor accounts I need to have available and everything like that. So I do plan to do, basically I'm going to be doing that again this year now as I look towards the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Are you worried about the aggregate supply?
Yes, very much so.
Can you give me a breakdown on what the situation is?
Yeah, just as everything else, limited resources. There's not that many vendors on Guam that even have it available in the first place. But even beyond that, it's difficult on an availability perspective on a per day basis too. Not only is the overall total amount relatively constrained, but how much can get out of their site and into our projects is also constrained.
Are we exporting or importing any aggregate, or are we just sourcing it all locally?
We're sourcing everything locally for now. But I do think that there are contractors now who are looking to start importing because it's too much of a risk sometimes to really project out 2 years from now. I think the current estimates are that we have basically about a year left on some of the quarries that are available right now.
Sure. I mean, and there's speculated that there's stuff on Chamorro Land Trust and government-owned land.
Yes.
It's not privately held, right?
Yes.
So the government has to figure out how to extract that, facilitate extraction. If we had to go offshore, where do you think we would get it from?
Well, the biggest thing is that we probably still have to work with a lot of treaty countries. So I believe Taiwan is probably a big area people are looking at. Korea.
We couldn't go to like Saipan or something like that, or do they have the aggregate there?
Not that I know of. Not that I've heard from the top of my head. I do think that they would probably be looking to start increasing quarry capacity out there anyways, just because of the projects that are going to be going on there. But again, with the limited resource problems that we have, their resources are even more limited.
Yeah.
So I'd probably presume that even if they did have a quarry out there being made and developed and grown and expanded, it'd probably be all used locally there anyways.
What do you think about these new like concretes that like absorb electricity and all that? Oh, is that real?
The science is interesting.
Yeah.
And I've definitely looked into the science a lot, and I think it's fascinating. I think there seems to be a lot of potential in terms of what it's capable of. I think the primary issues that I've seen on a lot of them, though, is either a scalability problem or potentially a longevity problem.
Right. But so we have Destino, right? So you could take a big swing. You could stand up Proferre Jr. and we're going to do electric conducting houses, right? So if you wanted to take a big swing, like what interests you? Like what do you think would be interesting for the market?
Well, it's still a little bit different, right? Because Proferre doesn't really do structural, so this is really purely just a personal.
No,
fascination.
I'm talking personal. I'm not talking about your business, right?
Yeah,
but you're someone who's into technology, who's young, educated, and has ideas about how to develop. What would you do?
So I think again, from a personal fascination perspective, I really do think that there's a lot of interest behind the sort of more environmental concrete stuff, right? Like those concrete that can theoretically absorb a lot more CO2 and everything like that. That has a lot of interesting components to it that I think could have a dramatic effect on our ability to continue to develop. Obviously, environmental sustainability is always a huge problem with any sort of project that's going on. And being able to alleviate sort of that check mark from the box can absolutely increase the speed at which we're able to do these projects. Similarly, on the other hand, I've seen through the Center for Island Sustainability, they have been looking at sort of concrete replacement, utilizing a lot of trash and everything like that. And supposedly, at least from the sort of compression forces and shear forces, it seems to be strong enough. But again, can it scale up and can it actually last long enough? And if it can, I think that's also a pretty interesting component, because again, we remove ourselves from that resource constraint of the aggregate to get to the concrete that we need to get to.
Right.
And so it can solve a lot of problems at the same time.
We should burn the trash. No, but yeah, no, that's all I see now. Like when I look at when I look these TED Talks and stuff, they're talking about like concrete, like that grows like plants outside and lowers the temperature. And I think that stuff's amazing. I'd love to see that stuff in the market because, it blends, that sustainability in our way we'd want to present. So, yeah. Absolutely. It was really cool, Randy. Thanks for coming in. I really appreciate your insight and you educating me. I'm private side, always real estate. I never delved into the federal side, so it was an education for me. But I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And Proferre Inc, burgeoning local company, and they're doing energy, concrete. Maybe one day. That was a great conversation with Randy, and he educated me on a lot of things that I didn't know. Primarily the idea as far as attaching labor to projects outside the fence and the need that we have to establish some incentives to bring construction companies outside the fence to work on projects that are going to solve the needs that we have. Please continue to listen, share, subscribe, and save all our content as we attack these problems together and try and find a solution for the market. We're here for you at Data Points. Please like, share, subscribe, save, listen to us on any of the platforms that we are on, and we'll see you next time.